just to start with, it's one I wrote for my late wife many, many years ago when we were very young together. It's called Kitchen Song. She has a way with her to make pots and pans fall down in homage as she passes, and each day we lose a cup or a glass or saucer, and she is my lady of the fragments. A lot of the poems are short, so I think we better leave the applause to the later. The old poet speaks. At a reading, and I'm introduced as the magazine's oldest contributor. I think they mean it humorously, but it occurs to me that they could be right. The others are all dead, or may as well be when it comes to being seen in public. I make a remark about forgetting to bring my walking frame, and everyone laughs politely, though they're unsure about whether or not I'm serious. I look at the pretty girls in the audience and think of the poems I used to write. This next poem, it's what I like to think of as a play poem, which means I indulge myself to a great deal in this one, with references to all kinds of old films, songs, all sorts of things. And I love reading this with a microphone because I can sing a couple of the lines. And I'm a frustrated big band singer. I'd love to have been standing in front of the old style big bands in the Palais des Danses, you know, with all the sort of 14-piece orchestra behind me, me crooning at the microphone, but I never got to do it, so this is the substitute. It's called Easter in Stockport. I am sitting in a comfortable high-rise flat overlooking the industrial wasteland of Stockport. Wasteland? This is going to be very poetic. And the past comes quietly creeping in on me like a smooth grey smog from the factories. Easter in New York, April in Paris. Why do they bring this spring feeling when I know I don't want to be anywhere else? Irene is in the kitchen cooking breakfast. Isn't it romantic? And last night we made love for the second time. You would be surprised at what happens in those high-rise flats. But here they come again, old poems, old songs, memories flooding in as the lock gates open. I see her face before me, half hidden behind a boiled egg in the morning paper. My mood is swimming in a coffee cup. The radio is pumping out another old song, but I can't place it. And some lines from a poem slip through my mind like shadowy ships gliding into the Frisco fog in a flickering 40s mystery movie. We ought to be high on a windy hill. The sky is up above the roof. The smoke from a cigarette curls between us. A photograph of a French poet, ash-heavy cigarette dangling from his lips, snaps upon the screen. Easter in New York. The girl with paper roses on her straw hat, they sing through eternity who sing like that. The belle of New York, old films, old poems, old songs, memories. Irene rustles the paper, clinks a teaspoon against a sugar bowl. The weak sun starts to climb high into a sky of shifting clouds. Noises drift up from the street. Easter eases in like a slowly melting chocolate egg. One of my literary heroes many years ago was the American writer Jack Kerouac, the beat writer. He wasn't the most perfect of writers, but when he got the right note, when he hit the right thing, he was wonderful. And it's a poem called Dear Jack. I am sitting in the laundrette Saturday morning, listening to the ladies talking about this and that. The copies of your letters to Carolyn came today, and I keep glancing through them. All that toing and froing in the world, all that sadness and anxiety. You should have stayed with what you understood, Jack. Small town stuff, mill walls and the ghosts of workmen, pool room banter and football games. You would have loved it here just now. Bright sunlight promise, easy words with nothing underneath, the familiarity of the ordinary. I watched the big blonde sliding her black underwear into the machine. Glimpses of secret pleasures, quick smiles, warm fumblings in half-lit bedrooms. And lunchtime pubs on a day like this, the men with racing papers winding down from the week's work. Ah, Jack, what went wrong? Did we all get too smart, sending Spengler through the post, pretending we knew what was happening? The West will decline in its own way and without our help. But somewhere there's a bar, and 2 drinks on it, and 2 men leaning and laughing with all the time that's needed to catch that moment when everything seems perfect. And a poem called The Pleasures of Poetry. I once read a poem that began, "It is the picnic with Ruth in the spring." And I always thought that that was the finest opening for a poem I'd ever seen. I mean, you know just where you are. You've got Ruth and the man with her. You've got the picnic and the spring, when a young man's fancy turns to, well, whatever it is it turns to. So in a way, you don't need the rest of the poem. Though it's a really good poem, but you can imagine what will happen between Ruth and the man, and what they ate and drank and talked about and did. And you can see the day drawing to a close, and the crumbs scattered on the cloth, and the way they fall off into the grass when they pick up the cloth, and how the ants and other insects will find them as Ruth and the man walk into the sunset. And you think, all that from just one line. There is something about poetry after all. There's a poem called, well, to explain first of all, I love cats, I dearly love cats, but this is a poem called Killing Cats. When I was a child, I watched my father drown kittens in an old bucket. He held them under the water until they stopped struggling. The best thing for them, he said. Around the same time, I helped a friend take a stray cat to the local police station, where they had a special gas oven. A sergeant placed the cat inside. They don't feel a thing, he said. And not too long ago, I took our aging ginger Tom to the local vet and held it down on the table while he put it to sleep. It was the kindest thing, he said. And now, at home, I stroke a new cat, and she purrs in response and eats the food I give her. But she doesn't trust me too much, and who can blame her? I could kill her with kindness. Poem called A Smile. When I was a boy, she was pointed out to me as the town whore. I know there must have been more than just her, but that fat, ungainly woman captured my imagination. What would she not do? Huddled behind the bike shed, we traded tales of schoolboys sampling her for £0.50. One was said to have been seen disappearing into her house in the late afternoon, and we wondered if he'd ever come out again. She always was a mystery to me, until on a summer evening, wandering alone by the river, I pushed through the long grass and came upon her in the act, skirt pulled up to her waist, and with a thrusting man, pants around his ankles, sprawled on top of her. I paused, and as I did, she looked over his shoulder and gave me a little smile. I stared, then fled, and for almost 70 years I've wondered about that smile. There's a poem about my father, who was quite a man, tough old man. He'd been in the Navy 14 years, and as they used to say, he was a rough man and used to rough ways, but I dearly loved him. The difference between us. My father, in his younger days, had chased pirates in the China Seas, shelled Bolsheviks near Vladivostok, brawled with bottles and knives in a Mexican bar, and nearly had his throat cut in a barber shop in Ireland at the time of the Troubles. He had also been a steeplejack, a docker and a labourer, not to mention one of the army of unemployed, walking 20 miles a day in search of a job. Towards the end of his life, it happened that we both worked in the same factory. Those were, I suppose, his quiet years, sweeping floors and drinking 2 pints only each Saturday lunchtime because his bowels wouldn't take it anymore. He hadn't much to say, that tired old man, when we met in the pub. He would laugh about the time he jumped ship, or remember what was said to him when he got drunk and missed the sailing of the Royal Squadron. I asked him why he'd killed Bolsheviks, and he didn't know. It was something that had happened long ago. The few good times came back, the odd words spilled out from conversations 40 years before. A sight seen like the Grand Fleet in line at Jutland would come into his inner eye, and he would lean on the bar and quietly look out to sea. When he died, they scattered his ashes at the crematorium. The old sailor who rarely spoke of anything but ships, lying amongst the soil and grass he didn't know. Any water would have done. The shore at a seaside resort, or the river even. But instead he was thrown onto a garden. Flowers and poems, he would have laughed at what we gave him for a funeral. La vie de Bohème. I'm in Paris browsing the books in Shakespeare and Company, and I can't help but hearing the conversation between 2 serious young Americans. What are you working on, one asks, and the other replies that she's working on a novel, and they exchange ideas about the difficulties of writing here and writing there, and finding the time and finding a publisher, and then a critic who will understand what they've written. And I continue to look at books about 19th century Bohemian Paris, while I try to recall who it was who once asked what he was working on, looked thoughtful, and said, "Getting drunk." Going back to my early days in the 1950s, rough justice. The lieutenant was a bully, and one private in particular bore the brunt of his bad temper. Picked up for untidiness on parade, booked for incorrect equipment during a routine inspection, and denied permission to leave camp because he was, the lieutenant said, in need of a haircut. The private spent most of his time doing extra guard duties or parading in full kit several times a day. It went on, and one day, returning to camp after a couple of weeks' leave, the private was told by the lieutenant that he was on a charge for being late. That night, the private somehow got hold of a rifle and ammunition and waited for the lieutenant, who told him he hadn't the guts to pull the trigger. "You don't need guts, you need a finger," the private said, and shot the lieutenant. None of us bothered to mourn his passing. Over the years, I have a series of poems that I call stories. They're always based on anecdotes that people tell me, people I've worked with or just talked to in pubs and anywhere else. So the voice that you hear in the poem is not my voice, it's the voice of the person who's told me the story. And this one's called Christine's Story. So he kept coming home drunk and shouting for his dinner. And I got so tired of it, you know, that one day when he complained and said the dog was treated better than him, I emptied a can of dog food into a pan and heated it up and told him it was Irish stew. He ate it and went to sleep, so I gave the dog the meat I really bought for his meal. Of course, I told him what I'd done the next morning when he was hungover, and he puked his heart out. Served him right, the bastard. He never shouted for his dinner again. A poem called Philosophy. I am drinking in London on a bright November day, and someone asks about the pretty French philosopher I once knew. I look out at the leaves drifting in the square and think of Edith Piaf. It seems a lifetime away, and I could colour it with cafes and Sartre and that sort of existence, but I had made a choice to see things as they were. And the truth of it was, she thought little of continental concerns, and we walked along the banks of an English river, and not by the side of the Seine. But the red and gold of the falling leaves makes me nostalgic again. An old craving creeps in, a thin taste of bitterness cutting through the alcohol. The question is repeated across the noise of the pub, and I shrug and reply, everything has to end. And my friend laughs and says, well, at least she left you philosophical. All right, on time. Yeah. For an old comrade, I thought that you would always be there, and that when I went back and walked through the streets, I'd hear your voice call my name. And I imagined that I would never forget which pub to find you in, and that we could drink and talk about jazz and books and socialism. I hoped that somehow we'd share a store of memories, and that we would laugh about the times we'd known and wonder together about friends who were gone. And then the letter arrived to say that you had died. These are the days when such news comes too often, and all that is solid melts into air. A day in the country. I head into the country to visit her, and she offers me white wine and food, and then asks if I'd like a banana with a topping of Cornish ice cream. I nod and look over her shoulder at the long field, trees in the distance, the blue sky, and even some cows. A strange sight for someone like me. The country is curious, but she is very nice and chatters away as I sip more white wine and think about the way in which our lives intertwine. Later I head back into the city with its walls and noise, but that night I dream I am lost in the country and looking for the light in her window. Well, this is another of the stories. This one's Tony's story. I used to be in the police in Liverpool when I was young. And one night out in the patrol car, we got a call telling us to go to a tower block where there'd been a death. Not a murder or anything like that, but we had to check it out. So we got there and the medics said it looked like natural causes. But the wife was hysterical. The man had died, well, on the job, as they say. So I tried to console her, saying that losing her husband was terrible. And she stopped crying and said, but that's it, he's not my husband. He's on the night shift down at the Ford factory. I'll just read one or two more. There's a little one called The Lesson. Jean Perry had a dog, a large Alsatian, and always brought it with her when we went out. The damn thing watched me all the time and growled whenever I made a move towards her. There wasn't any sex in our relationship, as you can guess, but it was a useful lesson. Women who prefer cats are a better proposition. I'll just read two more. One's called Desire. She said there was a princess in Italy who could make men quiver with desire simply by peeling off one of her gloves. And I thought, yes, that's fascinating. I'd been at an exhibition earlier that day, paintings of ladies in long dresses with high necklines, and I could imagine how a glimpse of a wrist would be exciting. And later, walking through the streets, passing women wearing very little, I began to see how much I was missing by being shown almost everything. And one last one to finish off with, called Dirty Old Blues. When I play her a record of a dirty old blues, she looks at me and says, are you making suggestions? And I reply, of course not. I just want you to listen to the poetry and the lyrics about grinding all night. I just want you to enjoy the subtleties of the song when the singer says he likes his baby's putting, and be fascinated by the lines about keeping on churning till the butter comes, if you know what I mean. And she smiles at me and says, I know what you mean, all right, and the answer is, there's no rocking tonight.